We are going to talk about lapsed donors and how to re-engage them. Definitely not a problem for any nonprofit that comes up. So should be very, very practical. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Again, want to mention a special thank you to all of our sponsors for helping us put this on. We could not do this without them. And the fact that the Responsive Nonprofit Summit is completely free, completely virtual, is all because of their support. So very, very grateful for that. Great to see all of you utilizing the chat. Please jump in there. We definitely don't bite. Kelly is in there, and she does a great job, and just love to see all of the engagement happening there. So yeah, tell us where you're from. Even tell us the organization that you're with. That would be awesome. And then if you've got questions, if you've got comments, please feel free throughout this session. This will be a panel discussion, so to the extent that we can, we'll try to pull in some of those questions. Would love to hear your experiences on this topic, and so definitely utilize that. So without further ado, let's jump in, because you didn't come here to listen to me ramble. You came to hear our amazing panel this morning. So my name is Jason Van Loo. I am the VP of Product here at Virtuous. This is Carly to my right. I'll let her introduce herself in a minute, as well as the rest of our panelists. And so I'm gonna just let y'all introduce yourselves, give a little bit about your background. We'll do it a little bit round robin style. So Samantha, we'll start with you, and then maybe we'll go to Barbara, maybe we'll go to Colin, and then Carly, you can wrap us up. So Samantha, we'll kick it over to you, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha. I'm with the Kids Place of Tampa Bay, and I'm here in Tampa, Florida. We help foster children, and I've been part of this team for just over 12 years.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I'm Barbara O'Reilly. I'm founder and principal of Windmill Hill Consulting, a fundraising consultancy here in the greater DC area. And I've been in the sector for 30 years and have seen just about everything. But my particular soapbox is donor retention and making sure we try to flip this switch to reverse the trends that we've been seeing in terms of the declining number of donors to our own organizations and throughout the sector. So I'm delighted to be here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Colin. I am the database administrator for Trotter Ministries, which is a homeless nonprofit mission in West Michigan. Yeah, kind of the same along the lines as Barbara. One thing that we've been focusing on a lot is cultivating our donors, so that way we don't get to that point where they're lapsed, but then also building out really intricate strategies that once they do start to lapse, how can we recultivate them to make sure that they don't get too far lapsed in the process. So really excited to speak on this topic.
Thanks, Colin. So I'm Carly Berna. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Virtuous. Previously, I spent 7 years being a Virtuous customer and 10 years total being a fundraiser, just like all of you. But I'm really excited for this session because lapsed donors and donor retention is such a huge issue in the nonprofit sector. But before we get started, I want to just talk about the definition of lapsed donors. So generally, I would say this is when a donor lapsed or hasn't given or engaged in 12 months or more. You may define this in different ways: 6 months, 9 months, 12 months plus. If you have Virtuous, you may have seen a pre-lapse tag on some of your donors. This means that they're getting ready to hit that lapse mark. And so it's so important to focus on these lapsed donors because it's way easier to keep someone who already knows about your organization than go out and try to find someone new and teach them about your organization. So we're going to start by just giving an overview on what's happening in the industry, what kind of trends that Barbara's seeing when it comes to lapsed donors and donor retention. And then from there, we're going to move to looking at some case studies of putting some donor retention journeys in place so that you can have some tactical takeaways from this session. So Barbara, I'll hand it over to you to start.
Yeah. So thanks, Carly. So, the headline is the donors, that we are losing donors, right? And I hope that that's not a surprise to anyone. It should be enough to kind of a wake-up call for folks to rethink the way we've been doing our donor engagement and our fundraising strategies to this date, to this point, because we're seeing this. Fundraising Effectiveness Project has been tracking this in terms of declining retention rates. So on average, organizations are losing about 60% of donors each and every year. That's both new and sort of ongoing donors. So that's not great, and that number has been declining steadily in slow, like 1-2% increments for the last number of years. First-time donors, really even worse. So about 20% on average of first-time donors are making a second gift or sticking around a little bit longer. We're also seeing, even for just in the sector, part of the Giving USA annual report, the research team at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy has been tracking that the number of donors to nonprofits has been steadily declining. So we're seeing this show up in about a 20% decline in donors to nonprofits. And I say that very specifically because donors are giving in lots of different ways now. They're giving through GoFundMe, they're giving through Facebook fundraisers, they're doing more mutual aid, they're exercising their generosity and expressing their generosity in a lot of different ways. And it's not just to registered 501c3s here in the US. So that's an important distinction to make and an important trend line to be watching for. So it kind of correlates to what we see in the FEP, the fundraising effectiveness stats as well, right? The sort of average donor retention rates. But what's also curious is that the reactivation rates for inactive donors is, generally somewhere between 1% and 4%. So it just further underscores that if a donor gets to that point where they are not making their continued gifts in some way, that likelihood of reactivating them becomes extraordinarily more difficult. And we know that there's it's a channel issue, right? So it's how we're communicating with them. If it's multi-channel, absolutely has greater effectiveness than if it's just one or the other. The Virtuous Next After report, multi-channel report that was done in 2020 proves this. It shows that there's the donors who are communicated with through analog and digital channels, right? So, and even phone, were like twice as likely to be retained and 3 times more generous. I mean, like the numbers show that we are, the more we can engage them on the platform in the way that they are kind of more receptive, really works. The way we talk about our organizations, the way we connect with our donors, so that they don't become lapsed also matters. So Dr. Adrienne Sargent has talked about, the impersonal nature of communications is an automatic turnoff, or when donors don't feel like their support in whatever way, their involvement is actually making a difference, whether they know it or can see it or even kind of correlate those impact statements. Those are ways that they get turned off, and they might just decide not to make a gift again. But also it's how we build out those cadences. And I know Colin and Samantha will talk about this around those donor journeys, but how we build out those cadences for regular touch points so that our donors realize that they are supporting our organizations, that their involvement in whatever way is making a difference. So the headline of our donor retention, our lapsed donors being a major problem, is one that, I hope that we can sort of course correct quickly, sooner rather than later, because it's lots of hard work that goes to waste if we can't keep those donors, loyal to our organizations.
Yeah, that's a really great overview. Before we move to the case studies, you have the opportunity to work with so many organizations. Do you have like one takeaway or one thing that you're seeing that's really working when it comes to donor retention?
So consistency of communications for sure, building out a regular cadence of touch points, both solicitation and non-solicitation. We're working with a client right now that had an average retention rate of about like 22%. And over the last 6 months, even just the last 6 months, we've been able to turn that around, and they now have, we just ran the numbers again, they have like an average retention of 37%. So that cadence of communications, that the storytelling, the connecting the donors with the impact, even through one, stories of one, has been hugely successful, and it really resonates with those donors. And I would say also the personalization. So creating those dialogues, making sure that there's phone calls that are brought into the donor engagement stream, or surveys that when we'll do surveys with clients where they send down and they ask, where does this organization fit in your priorities? Or tell us how often you want to hear from us. Tell us what you want to learn more about. What's your experience like as a donor? Those things then bring back really, really important information that can maybe tweak a little bit of the way that the organization communicates, bring in some information that might be worth a separate meeting with those donors. So I think those two-way conversations, the consistency of the communications, and the storytelling that really keeps them emotionally and intellectually hooked on the importance of their work are three things that we have seen really, really work well with improving retention.
Yeah, I think those are great takeaways. Most people lapse not just for no reason, but because they're not feeling the impact of the organization, or they're not hearing from the organization, or they're not hearing that story they want to hear, or like you said, they're not feeling that personalized communication, that relationship. So all three of those are really great.
Yep. Yeah. And it doesn't take a lot, like even just doing a thank you note that's prompt and timely and meaningful, even just that, and then following it up a little bit later. And I'm sure Colin and Samantha have great examples of that. But even just starting with that is so critical, because if the donor makes the gift, feels really, really good, and is so excited about the possibility of what that gift of any size can do for that mission, and then they don't hear from the organization at all or in any timely way, like think about how let down that person feels. And we have the neuroscience research to show us that there are changes in our brain when we make that gift, or we're thinking about that organization, like it fires off the reward parts of our brain. So this is so much more than just making that gift or volunteering that hour of time. This is really a connection that the donor or the volunteer is making. And if we don't honor that in a way that's timely and responsive, then it becomes, it just lets them down in so many ways.
Yeah. And like you said, Barbara, it doesn't take much, right? I mean, giving is so personal. So when I give to an organization, it's almost not like when you make a consumer purchase, you're almost preparing yourself to be let down in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I give a gift, no, I'm super passionate about this organization. I want to see them succeed. I'm willing to put up with a lot. And so even if it's just a thank you note, or even if it's just a phone call, gosh, that can do so much in continuing to make me feel like, okay, they see me.
Yeah,
I matter to them, and we're sort of linking arms, because our supporters, like, they want to be engaged with, they want to be a part of the mission. It's not like they're looking for ways never to give again, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's move to one of the case studies, and the examples we're going to go through today are really great because those who are in this session, you may be along different places in this journey. Maybe you're just thinking about it. Maybe you've started it. Maybe you've completed it and you're ready to start over and figure out how to tweak it. But let's start with Samantha. I know you guys have been using some automation and you've gotten to this point of thinking about how to address the lapse problem. Walk me through how you got to that process.
Yeah, we actually, I think we started really during COVID. For us was this journey of really finding out why our donors give to a kid's place and really jumping back in to kind of complete some of the big projects we had started. We had time, we weren't in the community as much. So we were like, let's close up some things. And we went down that rabbit hole of automations with Virtuous. And it really was amazing. It's quite a big rabbit hole, but once you go in there, I say start small. But for us, we realized that we were actually losing half of our new donors every year, and we were gaining just as many new donors every year. So we didn't really see it as a alarm until we really dug into that data. So it's really important to dive into your data and find out like what's going on with your donors. And from there, we were like, we really need to communicate with our current donors more because we don't want to lose them. Like, we're going to focus on our pre-lapse and lapse and re-engaging them, but we really need to have a solid communications plan from the beginning so that when we do bring them back into the fold, they're not like, oh, there they dropped off again, or they're not communicating with us again. And I think also during COVID, it was so much about sharing what's going on with your organization, with our community. So it really helped us ramp up those personal stories and connecting with our donors to share how they were saving our children's lives and making an impact here at a kid's place. So with that journey, we created that journey map and really found out where our donors were coming in and where they were coming from. We increased our e-news communications to twice a month and really got consistent with that. And then once we were able to maintain that, we went into automations of first-time gift series, and then a second-time gift series, and then major, and then sustaining. And then we created some fun ones like birthdays and anniversaries on their first dates. And from there, really started going into, okay, that did the automated part and the email communication, but how are we doing it personally? So let's make sure that we're following up with thank you calls for every donation that's coming in, and really picking up the phone and having conversations with those donors. And then we do a 3-month thank you handwritten card with the help of our volunteers. Like, it's not all just on the staff, but we really wanted to have those personal touch points, as Barbara had shared, that were outside of ask, so that we were getting 3 to 4 personal touches before we made that first ask again. And that's kind of how we went down that lane. We've had great success with our automations. I would say all of them average about a 50% or more open rate and a 10% click rate. So that showed us that people really wanted to get re-engaged and learn more about our organization, and that helped propel us going further and further into that communication and personalizing and really working on those individual relationships with our donors. And then from there, we added the direct mail piece to the pre-lapse and lapse and first-time gifts, so that we were hitting it from different angles, whether you communicate and give to us online, whether you do it through mail, social media, we were having those same communications going across all boards.
I love that point that you said about starting small, because I think automation can be so overwhelming. And now talking about donor retention. So I think starting small, doing a small automation or a small way to reach a lapsed donor is super important. And the other thing that I'd like you to just flush out a little bit is, you said you did a journey map. What did that actually look like? Did you sit in a room with sticky notes, or how did you do that journey map?
It's probably a little scary, but we have a huge 10-foot wide whiteboard, and we kind of really started with there with square one. Like, this is where our donor came in with their first gift. And we're going to do 3 informational emails about a kid's place, who we are and what we do. And hopefully they make a second gift in that series. And if they made a second gift, then they went into another realm where we had another series of emails, and maybe an email from our CEO and myself, and invited them out for a tour. And, they were kind of popping out and going in. And what's really important about that donor journey is you have to take a step back after it's created and punch some holes in it and make sure they don't fall into a couple of them at the same time. Which we found as we were growing further down the line. When we added our pre-lapse series, Virtuous has a definition of pre-lapse is at 6 months. Well, we were considering our pre-lapse at 9 months. So we had to make sure we added that 30-day delay in that automation so that they weren't in both series at the same time. But really kind of looking at it from a donor perspective. If I came into the organization, what did I need to learn? What did I want to learn? How are my dollars making impact at a kid's place, and was it personal? And then again, just those more personal aspects outside of the automation piece. So we have an Excel spreadsheet, it's color coded. What is email? What is a phone call? And what is a handwritten note? And making sure that we have 3 colors in each segment. So they're getting touched by every way they may communicate, because you don't know all of your donors. So if we're at least touching at least in one time in each of those categories, we're hoping to connect with them and be able to build a stronger relationship.
And when you were going through that process, did you determine what metrics or how you wanted to measure the donor journey once you put the automation in place?
I think seeing the successes with the open rate really helped prepare us to continue that mission forward. And then those personal phone calls, first time gifts, how did we learn so much about those donors when we were like, how'd you hear about us? Why did you give to us? So I think those two, seeing those successes really helped propel to keep building this into a more robust system and really make sure that we were hitting it from every angle.
Yeah, that's great. So for those who haven't started any type of automation who are watching this right now and are very envious of your 50% open rates, what would you say to them? What's kind of your encouragement to those in that camp?
I would say start small. I can't stress that enough with automations. Let it run for 3 months before you do another automation. Make sure it works. Go back, test it out, and then come back out with fresh eyes. We go into these plans and we're like, oh, we're going to write 6 email series. And then we go back and we're like, wow, that language wasn't as fun. Or, have other people read it and make sure that it's engaging and not personal. Make sure, it's exciting what's going on. All of us work in these amazing nonprofits and we have all these great things happening, but we get into our language sometimes and forget that these are just personal people that want to impact lives and save the world. So that would be my biggest, is just to go back and lighten the email a little bit and have some links to your socials or personal tours and things of that nature so that they feel like it's really geared to them. I mean, I was amazed when I got responses because people were having conversations with me. They're like, oh, thank you so much. I'm starting a drive for you guys. I'm like, at first I didn't realize it was from an automation. I'm like, I didn't email them, but I did from the automation. So I think just remember to keep it personal and not too sales and pitchy. People really want to learn about what you do, and not everyone can come on our campuses or our offices to make an impact. So how are we sharing that so they feel that they are?
Yeah, that's great. I think another great way to see that response is to kind of go as a secret shopper through your own series. Yes. And see what it's like and experience it, because it does feel like the CEO is actually sending you an email, or the director of development is actually sending you an email. So that's a great takeaway.
And one more thing to your point is think about your titles that you're putting out there in those subject lines. The emojis help. They make it a little bit more personal, but even to you saying being a secret shopper to yourself, I had a few come back to me and I was like, why would we say it that way? And once you get into that pre-lapse, don't say we miss you. Don't, because what if you have a corporate giver who owns a business and then also they're an individual giver and they gave over here but didn't over here, so this one fell into pre-lapse. So be mindful of how those things are coming across, because there are some that kind of slip through the cracks and you don't want them to be offended, because that's what makes it feel, well, this is an automation, it's not personal.
Yeah, that's great. These are actual people that we're talking to, so we have to think about how they're going to respond. Yeah. Okay. Let's move over to Colin. I know you're also going through this process of figuring out how to have better donor retention. So walk us through your process of how you got to the automations or what you're doing currently.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to come into a team who had a lot of virtuous knowledge already kind of built up. They had a lot of very robust workflow processes that were already built out. So I was able to kind of jump in and just learn as I went along. But similar to Samantha, kind of where we start really is we look at, okay, what's the criteria for the donor audience that we're trying to target, or the query that you're querying for in the workflow step, in the original step, if you will. And then what I always like to do is say, okay, that's the starting point. In X amount of time, where do I want their end point to be? And then, within that time frame, 50% of the way through, where do I want them to be at that point? And then I kind of build the intermediate steps from there. And again, we do use a whiteboard. The whole north wall of our conference room is a giant whiteboard. I always like, because I'm a very tactile thinker. I like to start there. But yeah, we also noticed that our new donor workflow was very well built out. We were seeing a lot of second time gifts off of that. But then I think it was post 180 days, they were kind of falling off. Some were tending to give a year later after, because we do have an annual donor workflow that's built that's saying, hey, did you know that this is your gift date, your anniversary date of the first time you ever gave to us? And that tends to trigger some more gifts. But there was a lot of lost fruit between that 180 days and that 365 days where we weren't seeing that same group 10 to 10. So we knew that we wanted to try and build out a retention-focused workflow for our donors that was, again, kind of multi-channel, but also I want to say multi-giving level. So a lot of our workflows are built based on the capacity level of each donor, and then also the medium through which they gave. And also with tied to the medium, the available data points, right? So if I'm only an online giver and I've only ever given you my email address, there's no sense in trying to send me a letter on demand or a direct mail piece because you don't know my physical address. So we kind of gear it that way. And then also when we have donors who are a little bit higher tier end, we tend to give them more human-centric focused tasks. So physical phone calls from us, physical emails, physical thank you cards. And then when they're a little bit lower tier, we still do physical thank you cards and physical phone calls, but some of that follow-up saying like, hey, did you know we have this, that, or the other event going on is a little bit more like kind of mass email feely. And that's just kind of how we handle it for most of our workflows.
So talk about that multi-channel approach you said. Like, you know, how did you determine if they're going to get an email or a mail piece or a phone call within the journey that you were planning?
Yeah, so again, a lot of it depends on what data points are available. So assuming we have all data points available, at least how it goes in our new donor workflow, we want to make sure that when we have a new donor or even a recurring donor come through, we want to make that follow-up and that recognition is as quick as possible. So we have a text message workflow set up for our new donors that I think 24 hours after their first gift, we say, hey, thank you for giving to Mel Trotter. We appreciate it so much. Here's how you can get involved in other ways. And then as we go along, we want to, again, it's kind of almost like a judgment call. Again, I've been blessed to have a lot of good team members who kind of know our donor pool in the greater Grand Rapids area and say, you know, it's important that we give them that initial follow-up right away, and then we leave them alone for X amount of time, and then maybe we follow up with a phone call and say, hey, did you see that email we sent you? And then we wait another couple of weeks, and if they don't respond, then maybe we, you know, send out a personal invite to have a mission tour or meet for a coffee or something like that. So I unfortunately don't have a lot of insight into like what mediums we choose, because that's more so our director of development and our gift advisors kind of brainstorming on, like, you know, because again, they know our community of donors very well. But yeah, it's definitely multi-channel, and it's definitely, I want to say, again, automatic follow-up right away to acknowledge that gift and make sure that the donor knows, hey, this is your impact. We've seen it come in. They have that confirmation that, like, okay, I gave them something. They've received it. That's great. And then after that, it's a little bit more personal. Like, how can we, you know, keep pulling you in, whether that's with monetary donations or getting you to come to an event, sign up to volunteer, coming at it from as many angles as possible to keep them invested in what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that really goes back to what Barbara said at the beginning, is making it very personal. Like, you know, he came to an event and now we're following up a few days later specifically about that. That makes it feel like we know who you are and we know that you just came to this event, not like you're just getting some random email that has nothing to do with what you just did. So Barbara, I want to throw it over to you. I know, like I had mentioned before, you work with a lot of different nonprofits. Do you have any specific examples similar to this where you put something in place to specifically help donor retention?
Yeah, so in addition to doing, making sure that first-time donor experience is really strong, we've worked with clients to put together the new, and much like what Samantha and Colin were talking about, those new donor welcome series that are spread out over a period of maybe 5 to 7 touch points over a period of time, just introducing them, welcoming them, making them feel like they've made the right decision to invest in this organization, sharing videos, having a board member do a call for a first-time donor, in addition to staff as well. So like all of that has worked really, really effectively to make those first-time donors feel welcome and part of that community. The other things that we've done are, really thinking about that, again, much along the lines of what Colin and Samantha were talking about, thinking about that longer trajectory. So what are all the different kinds of touch points? And multi-channel absolutely has to be the way to be thinking about this, because we are, as nonprofits, we're competing not just with other nonprofits, but we're competing with all the other demands of attention that our donors are facing. So they're facing all the social channels, they're facing their emails, they're facing all of the other things that they might be subscribing to or buying or watching. I mean, that it's all demanding attention of our donors. So we have to make sure that we are as personal as possible. And so when we're thinking about with our clients what those touch points look like, it's where can we make sure that there's as much of a human element as possible, that we're really using these to build that relationship, and combining it with print, emails, phone, and events. Small, it could be one-on-one events, it could be small cultivation or stewardship events. But what does that look like over a 12-month period? So that it ensures that donor regularly feels connected. And when those solicitations are peppered throughout the year, so it's multiple times a year, 3, 4, 5 times a year, it doesn't feel like that they're over solicited. Because when I look at studies that talk about why donors stop giving, one of the reasons, there are a number of different reasons, but one of them is that they feel they're being over solicited. And so many organizations that I know that we've worked with, they don't actually over solicit. But what happens sometimes is that they are not building in enough of that cycle so that there's a solicitation, and then there's all sorts of great stewardship and impact reporting that then sets up the next ask. So if that donor is like overwhelmed with all the channels all the time, and they get a solicitation, they might dismiss it, they get something else. A few months later, that's another solicitation, but maybe they've gotten some emails or other communications in between. If it's not connecting with them, they will feel like they're being over solicited. So I think we have to really look at, and that's why when we're working with clients, we're digging deep into the storytelling, the human element of how we can connect the donor with another human being. And those have been really, really powerful. And I would say the other piece that has worked well is picking up the phone and calling lapsed donors. So it might be that sometimes they don't even realize they've lapsed, right? It might just be asking, sometimes we will suggest like being a little bit fun and saying like, was it something we said? And, sending out a survey that makes it a little bit more light, but it reminds the donor that they were important to that organization, and might just be a couple simple questions that gets them re-engaged. So I think it's the consistency of the stories, it's the human element. So Samantha and I were chatting before we went live about how, just picking up the phone and hearing that voice really makes a difference to a person, to a donor. And while none of us ever pick up the phone, we don't recognize the number. If we leave a voicemail, golly gee, it's going to make a big difference, right, to that donor, make them feel, holy, like, wow, I can't believe this organization called me. I can't believe this board member called me. So those are the values that we really bring into our work with our clients, because they work, like they are effective. They build that relationship over time and not just going for those quick wins for those gifts every year.
Yeah, 2 things you said that made me think of a couple tactics that I've seen work is, one, sending out a survey to lapsed donors.
Yep.
If you ask them if they've given in the past 12 months, most of them say yes.
Yeah.
They don't think that they're actually a lapsed donor.
Right.
And so they think they're still connected.
Exactly.
And then the other thing I've seen is when you send out your end of year receipts, send them one that shows 0, because then it's a reminder to them that, oh, I thought I gave this year, but I really didn't. So
Right.
It's not like you're shaming them or anything, but it's a reminder. They think, oh yeah, I give to such and such organization, but it's just a reminder that, hey, they don't understand that they're lapsing, but you haven't given this year, and now might be a time to do that.
Yeah, and lapsing is our term, right? It's not our donor's term. So we're talking, about, we define these donors by their time frame of, well, they haven't given this fiscal year. But you're right, Carly, like to their minds, they're continuing to engage. And so it might be that the stuff that we're sending them just isn't capturing their attention for different reasons, or it's only on the channel that they're not giving. Right. And so, or you're really paying attention to. And so, I think really connecting it so it's not just, oh, you haven't given to us in 12 months. It's, you've been such a long time investor in our mission and our results, and we just want to make sure that you stay connected with us along this journey. Look at all these things that have happened because of donors like you. All of those things really, again, the more personal it can be, less that institutional speak. So I love what Samantha was saying about really looking at the language that goes out, because nothing falls flatter than a lead balloon than, on behalf of the board of directors, kind of, it's like, okay, I don't even know your board. Like, all right. So it brings it back to making sure that donor doesn't feel like they're not giving themselves that lapsed donor definition.
Yeah.
As y'all were talking, it reminded me. So I'm reading a book right now. It's called Unreasonable Hospitality. And,
oh, yeah.
I can't remember the author. Barbara, you may be able to tell me who the author is, but he basically was one of the owners of 11 Madison Park, which, if you know cuisine at all, has been one of the top restaurants in the world, continues to be multiple Michelin stars. I've never been there, but if you read stories about it, basically they are just known for their very personal, very, very, very personal service, and just how all of that works, to the extent where if you make a reservation, they have a team who like literally kind of stalks you and sort of like learns about you and knows who you are. And so when you arrive at the restaurant, it's not, sort of a stand that you're checking in for your reservation. It's very much, well, hello, Ms. Berna. How are you this evening?
Mm-hmm.
How did your trip to California go a couple of weeks ago? Did you get to see X, Y, or Z? And you're just like, oh my gosh. So point being, there's this sort of underlying topic within marketing, which is what can you do to sort of scale the unscalable? And with all the noise that we have, all of the emails, I mean, we're all in the same boat, right? Like I push that Gmail, bail me out button all the time, which is like delete all my emails. What are those things that are going to break through that? What are those unreasonable? It may sound crazy to say, well, I got to call like 200 people, or I got to handwrite a note, or I got to show up to like their office with a basket of something, or whatever. As crazy as it is, those could be the things that break through the noise and truly show, hey, this organization like really does care about me. So just spark some of those thoughts of that whole concept of, just because it's crazy or unreasonable doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, and it actually could be the secret sauce to getting some of these folks back on track.
Yeah, I love that book. It's Will Guidara who wrote it, and
Yes.
I did a whole. I've got a whole presentation that's grounded in that. It talks, and I lead with what does a hot dog have to do with unreasonable hospitality, right? Because you remember in the book, it was a story of, here's this Michelin-starred restaurant, and he happened to overhear the table of visitors saying, gosh, we've been all these great restaurants, but we've never had a New York hot dog. And he runs out and gets a New York hot dog, brings it back, has the kitchen in all their sort of shock and horror that a New York hot dog is in their kitchen, plates it and brings it out and says, we didn't want you to leave New York without this, right? And like just that little bit of a nuance of personalization, that attentiveness. And I know within the sector, an example like that or just the whole book and how they've elevated that whole experience, that dining experience, so that it's not just about the high quality food, but it's about, being welcome there and being appreciated for being there. I know that there's, the sector can't always do that level of uber personalization, but there's the tech now that can do that. There's the mindset that we have to rethink and shift in order to be putting more into how we communicate. Like, when American Express tells me, thank you so much for being a card member since whenever it was, 1992, I think. And like, I don't remember I've been a card member that long, but they do, right? And so we know when our donors first made their gifts. So like as Colin said, they sending out a little donorversary card or communication. Those little things, that nuggets of information we do know, we can bring that into how we communicate so that the donors say, oh my gosh, I haven't realized that I've been supporting them for so long.
I second those handwritten notes. I think they're huge to our donors, whether it's a 3-month update or 4-month update. And you can really get proactive with your volunteers with that. I feel our volunteers feel like it's also so impactful that they're part of such an important part of our mission in connecting with our donors. If we pull a query every month of if they haven't received the thank you call or a personal something, then they go in there for that thank you and try to get a month ahead of those cards so they're going out in a timely process. But those anniversary cards are huge. We get pictures from my donors. I'm like, oh, wow, thank you. So really that personal touch is really, really impactful.
Carly, I know before you came to Virtuous, you were at JVMI. And so talk to us a little bit about what you found, because I think you also have a very practical experience on engaging lapsed donors. So what were some of the tips you came away with?
Yeah, I'm loving all the commentary in the chat, by the way. So keep sharing all the things you're doing with lapsed donors. But I saw someone who wrote something about voicemails, and that's something we saw a lot of success. What we did is we put a couple of donor journeys in place, one at the 9 months, which is like the pre-lapsed, and one at the 12 months when they like officially lapsed. And we did automated through Virtuous ringless voicemails. And it was recorded by the CEO. And so it wasn't like a call where you answered and you hear like a robot talking. It looked like you had a voicemail from the CEO that said, hey, you're so important to the organization. I wanted to tell you about this campaign that's coming up. It was specifically about a match and something critical that was happening related to the mission. And, I'd like you to get involved, and then a call to action. And we didn't do that for very long, and we saw a 6-to-1 ROI on that campaign. And it was just automated. Like no one was picking up the phone and calling or doing anything like that. We did also do email and letter as well, but those voicemails really felt like this personal touch. And then they would immediately call back, or they would go to the website and they would give. And so we were just able to re-engage them in a way that felt very personal at a mass way that we could scale.
Yeah. Barbara, you mentioned it, like we have the tech in many ways to do a lot of this. There's nothing beyond the actual CEO picking up the phone and calling, but that's certainly pretty darn good if you can't do that in the same way. Like a handwritten note goes a super long way, but we've got great products out there. Handy Written's one. Where you can automate a lot of handwritten style notes. And so to me, those are two areas, phone and handwritten notes. For me personally, and this is kind of ironic. We talk about the multi-channel approach and the need to do email and SMS and all of these things. Absolutely. But the irony is like the analog stuff almost has a higher return now, because if I get a phone call, that's like, who's calling me? Who even knows like my number? Same thing with like a handwritten note. It's like, I mean, what do I get in the mail these days? Beyond Amazon packages and bills. So that's also kind of an interesting way of maybe coming full circle and thinking creatively about how we can even use some of those old school, quote unquote, channels to make more of that impression. Yeah,
I think that's great. As we kind of wrap up here, I want to just give some takeaways that I felt like we got from hearing from each of you. It sounded like creating a journey map, whether that's a whiteboard, your wall, using sticky notes, or being a secret shopper to your organization and kind of seeing where the donor may fall off, or what maybe they're getting too much communication. Also being really personalized, making them feel like giving is personal. Think of the organizations that you give to. You want to have a relationship with them. You want them to feel like they know you. How can you personalize your communication to them? And lastly, I think metrics, defining what you're trying to get to, whether it's donor retention or just engagement, defining that before you put that journey into place so that did this work, or do we need to go back and iterate?
Yeah, putting metrics in place. I mean, Barbara, you brought this up as well, but it's so easy to forget that. I think we can we can do a lot of the things that absolutely should be done. Build the donor journey map. Think about the different channels. But you're right. If we don't sit down and say, okay, what are we going to measure? Like, if our donor retention rate right now is at 20%, is it reasonable to say we want to get that to 30%?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that 10% is actually measurable, and then we can actually see, is this working or is it not? That is super important, and I think surprisingly, it's missed a lot of times because we're so quick to get into like, well, I just want to try this or kind of solutionize, and I think it's super helpful to make sure you've got outcomes in place that you want to actually measure against.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we are at time, unfortunately. These are always the sessions where you just go, Barbara, Samantha, Colin, I wish you guys could just hang out for, the rest of the day. Thank you to all of you for joining us, for giving us of your time and your expertise. Can't thank you enough. Really, really grateful. Thank you to everybody for tuning in and for the questions. Some great interactivity going on in the chat. Some great ideas there as well. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the work that you're doing. That is going to wrap up the technology stage for day 2. I went super fast, at least for me this morning. Trust that you got a lot of great insights out of it.